Yes, sedite. I'm the Roman Orthodox, but you can call me Roman or Magister Romano. Either way, it's up to you. And with this first video in our series about the Orthodox life, we're going to talk about becoming Orthodox. In other words, how do you become an Orthodox Christian? And as I said, in each video, we're going to take this in sort of three phases. One, what does the topic look like? In other words, what have I seen? What have I discovered about the topic? In other words, what sort of misconceptions and sort of hidden discoveries that I've made over the last few years as I've delved deeper into the topic? And lastly, differences between how the Orthodox Church does a particular thing and how traditionalist Catholicism does that same thing. So, as I said, our topic for today is becoming Eastern Orthodox. And I want to preface this by saying that none of these videos are meant to be spiritual direction, and they're not meant to be apologetic. I'm not trying to teach you about the Orthodox faith. I'm just sharing with you what I've observed, what I've heard, what I've learned. Okay, so whenever you become Orthodox, most people approach this from the perspective of being a convert. But before we can say anything about converting to Orthodoxy, the fact is that the most normative way to become Eastern Orthodox, or the most, numerically superior way, the most numerous path to becoming Eastern Orthodox, is that you are born into an Orthodox family, or at least you have Orthodox godparents, and you're baptized and chrismated as an infant, and of course you receive Holy Communion as an infant. Now, that is by far the most common way that people become Orthodox Christians. Now, there's a little bit of a prequel to getting baptized in the Orthodox Church if one is a baby, and that is the churching. The churching is a ritual whereby the mother, who has, especially in the Greek tradition, spent 40 days away from the church, comes back to the church and is brought into the church for the first time. So there's kind of built into the ritual a 40-day break from going to divine liturgy, going to the services after one gives birth, which makes a whole lot of sense if you think about it from just a hygienic and a health perspective, but also from a spiritual perspective. This is a time for the mother and the child to really develop those bonds that are going to become so important throughout one's life. So it's a time to recuperate. And then the church as a whole welcomes the mother back into its midst. But the churching is not just about the mother. It's also about introducing the baby to the church as a potential new member. When the baby is brought to church, she or he is brought closer and closer to the altar. And different traditions sort of do this differently, but usually the baby is brought, or at least normatively in the Antiochian Archdiocese, the baby is brought up to the icons of the Theotokos and Christ and introduced to those icons. And in the process of this, there are hymns that especially relate this ritual to the presentation of Jesus in the temple. If you can remember when Jesus was presented to St. Simeon, and this is when he spoke that famous prayer, the Nunc Dimittis, or the Lord, now lettest thou thy servant depart in peace according to thy word. That prayer is included in the ritual. And as I said, the baby is brought into the church and blessed, and then shown the icons. In some traditions, the newborn is actually brought into the altar area and taken around the altar or placed in front of the altar. It sort of depends on the tradition and on the rubrics involved. And it's at this point that the child is on a path to getting baptized in the Orthodox Church. Now, it must be said, in some areas of the world, it's customary for the child to actually have already been baptized with its godparents prior to the churching. So that does happen in some traditions. But after the churching, pretty much, at some point, whenever the family is ready, you have a baptism. Now, in most Orthodox cultures, baptism is a really big deal. And in my opinion, it should be a big deal. This is when someone joins the Orthodox Church. This is when someone is illuminated by the holy mysteries, will receive baptism, chrismation, that's the anointing with holy oil, and of course, First Holy Communion. And they'll be receiving that for the first time as Orthodox Christians. This is the best communion that they're ever going to make, probably. So, it's a huge deal. And of course, it also represents a commitment of the family on bringing this child up in the Orthodox Church. It is the addition of a soul to the Christian faith within a family. The recognition of this person as a member of the Orthodox community, and especially for ethnic Orthodox believers, also a recognition that this person is part of the national community, because entry in those communities, in those ethnicities where Orthodoxy is part of the national identity, a child being baptized in the faith, you might as well call it kind of an ecclesiastical naturalization, right? The person is joining the wider community and being introduced for the first time, or at least, if not for the first time, for the most important moment of becoming part of that community. So baptism should be a big deal. I wish more converts, when they have children and they're baptized in the Orthodox Church, would make a bigger deal of it. Throw a huge party and, invite people. It should be a huge thing and a great celebration. Now, with an infant baptism, you have the question of godparents. And so actually, during a baptismal ceremony, godparents do way more than the parents. Like, the parents just kind of watch and help out, but the godparents are the ones that are actually handing the baby to the priest, that are holding the baby throughout the ceremony. Your godparents are a very important role. The godparents of a child have a very important role in that child's life, to help them to understand their Orthodox faith, to pray for them, to guide and protect them as they are going through their life, their spiritual life. But also the godparent-godchild relationship, it's considered a family relationship in the Orthodox Church. So, for example, if your godparents, right, have a child, traditionally that child would be your god sibling, and you wouldn't be allowed to marry someone who is your god sibling or someone who has the same godparent. There are, of course, exceptions to everything, but that is how seriously the church takes the godparent-godchild relationship. And so choosing a godparent, it's a really big deal. My suggestion, especially if you're a convert family and you're bringing your children into the church, you should probably find some godparents that have been in the church for a long time, or have at least, or have ethnic roots in the church, something that's going to really have some staying power. And you should choose godparents that are going to truly understand the seriousness of the task of being your child's godparents. Along with this, in some traditions, the godparents will choose the patron saint, usually in consultation with the parents, although in some places the godparents really do just pick it without the parents. But in our case, we kind of chose the patron saint, and the godparents more or less went along with it. So, usually there is a patron saint. It's usually the child's name, but it doesn't have to be. Now, I will say there are some traditions, like the Serbian tradition, that have a completely different practice of patron saints. So they actually have family patrons, or Slava saints. And obviously one should follow the tradition of the church one is joining, or the jurisdiction that one is joining. So what if you are chosen to be a child's godparents? Well, you have a little bit of expense to cover. So, first and foremost, you may be asked to provide the cloths and the bottles that are going to be used during the ceremony for the holy oils, and the cloths that are used to dry the child coming out of the font. You may be asked to provide the baptismal garment, so usually a white dress of some variety, so an outfit for them to wear after they're baptized. The candles, and that can be either one candle or three, depending on the tradition. One sort of big ornate one for the child that's getting baptized, and then sometimes the two others are held by the godparents. A cross, which the child hopefully will keep throughout all of his or her life. And of course, other gifts that are appropriate for godparents, such as icons and so forth. It really can be a little bit of a burden, and you should take that role seriously, because parents do need your help and support as there's often quite a bit of expense in arranging the party, the reception, and all of these sorts of things. So as godparents, you should step up and help those parents out with that whole process. And what I do want to say here, because if you're coming at this from the perspective of a convert to Orthodoxy, you may think of this as the big moment in an Orthodox believer's life, right? Baptism and chrismation and First Holy Communion. This is the moment when one enters the church. But it's important to remember that getting baptized, getting chrismated, receiving First Holy Communion isn't a guarantee that a child will live an Orthodox life for the rest of his or her life on this earth. It has to be said that a lot of people, maybe most people who are baptized as children, whether it's as infants or as older children, eventually fall away from the faith. At some point, it doesn't matter whether you're baptized earlier or later in life. One has to make a decision to follow Christ, to follow the church, to really take the faith and make it one's own. And that, if that sounds overly evangelical, it's simply true. I know, for example, in the life of my wife, who was raised Orthodox, she had a moment in later adulthood when she really chose to make Orthodoxy her own, and that was when she taught in a predominantly Orthodox country and experienced Orthodoxy sort of live firsthand in an Orthodox culture. And it's from that she draws a lot of her strength to continue her Orthodox life to this day. And I would say that everyone has to have this moment where they face a choice of living like this world with its wickedness and sin, and living in accordance with the Orthodox faith. There is sort of a crisis moment, because as a child, right, you're a child. You learn childish things and you go through a normal life. But at some point, you become an adult and you have to make this your own as an adult. And I think that's really important. I think that the kind of decision that you make later in life makes a huge difference. And I see this in the lives of many cradle Orthodox people that I know. They talk about, moments when it clicked and they decided that they were going to really hold on to the faith. And if you are a cradle Orthodox believer or you're from an Orthodox country, maybe you can talk about it in the comments when you really decided, hey, I'm going to stick with this. I'm going to be devout. I'm going to follow what my parents were trying to teach me. Or maybe this wasn't your experience. Either way, I'd love to hear your comments, I'd love to read your comments. So be sure to leave those in the comment section below. Okay, so that is the most common way that people join the Orthodox Church as children. What about the way that maybe many of you have joined the Orthodox faith, or maybe you're thinking about joining the Orthodox faith? So that other process is conversion. The conversion process can be kind of more formal or less formal. Now, both of them end up with you becoming an Orthodox believer and receiving the sacraments. But some churches, some traditions, some jurisdictions have a much less formal or much less structured approach. In other words, you just go and you talk to the priest, and after a shorter or a longer period of time, whenever he thinks you're ready, you receive those sacraments and you're brought into the church. Other places may have a very formalized process where you're going to be taking classes and you're going to be in a group and you're going to be studying particular books and attending lectures. And that can be a great thing as well. I would say both approaches have their merits. There wasn't a formal process for the Ethiopian official, right, with St. Philip, and yet, we read about him in the Holy Scriptures, or for the thief on the cross, for that matter. But at the same time, we know that the early church had a very extended catechumenate, and so certainly that has a tradition as well. I think both have their merits, and you just need to follow the guidance of your priest at the parish or at the parish or chapel or mission that you attend. In a more formal process, becoming Orthodox takes sort of 3 stages. First, we refer to someone as being an inquirer. Now, anyone can be an inquirer. There's no ritual to this. There's no official recognition that you're an inquirer. And I always see this, I'm an Orthodox inquirer. And I think, well, that just means you're a normal person, right? Hopefully, everybody is an inquirer about something. But being an inquirer, I think, means generally that you're attending divine liturgy, that you're thinking about becoming Orthodox. Maybe you're attending the first few classes of Interested in Orthodoxy, right? Or Orthodoxy 101, whatever it's called at your parish. And that is what it is generally meant by being an inquirer. Like I said, I see a lot of people try to make something official out of being an Orthodox inquirer. But really, if you're interested, you're an inquirer, right? So maybe if you're just watching this video and have no intention of becoming Orthodox, you're still kind of an inquirer. So feel free to put that as a moniker on your webpage. I'm an Orthodox inquirer because I watch the Robot Orthodox. But the next step is something official, and that is the catechumenate. This is the process where you're learning about Orthodoxy officially, and you have received a blessing from the church. There's actually a ritual associated with this where you are blessed by the church as a catechumen. It's really the first ritual of baptism that's been sort of taken off and done separately. And that makes you a learner. That makes you a catechumen. The catechumen comes from a Greek word meaning someone who's being questioned, right? Just like you were in a classroom and someone is sort of testing you. So someone who's being tested. And this is an official status within the church. Once you are enrolled as a catechumen, you actually have the right to an Orthodox funeral if you pass away. It's understood that you are committing to becoming an Orthodox Christian. So if you think about being an inquirer as sort of dating, being a catechumen is like getting engaged. The next step is the actual initiation. And depending on your jurisdiction, that is going to be or going to consist of baptism, chrismation, and communion. Now, if you've already been baptized in a way that is blessable and your jurisdiction chooses to recognize that baptism, you might just receive chrismation and then communion. Or some jurisdictions for apostolic churches, apostolic communities, converts from like Catholicism or Oriental Orthodoxy, some communities will, instead of baptizing and chrismating those converts, will just require them to confess, that is, to go to confession and to renounce any errors, and then they are received with Holy Communion. I want to back up just a minute. Before you get to initiation, you're going to have to make your first confession or your life confession. And this is where you're going to talk about all of the sins to a priest that you have committed throughout your whole life. Now, I have a later video that we're going to be talking about confession and what that looks like in the Orthodox Church. But for the most part, a life confession, very similar in Catholic terms to a general confession. You're just going to confess all of the sins that you have committed. And this is sort of the first step in receiving those sacraments or mysteries of initiation. Now, I think that it's worth pointing out, because I mentioned that Orthodox converts have to make a decision, or sorry, cradle Orthodox have to make a decision after they're baptized, chrismated, etc., to stick with the Orthodox faith. That's just the world we live in today. And a lot of converts think about the decision to become Orthodox as actually happening before they receive those sacraments. So they think it's like sort of a inverse order whenever you convert later. And that is true. You do have to make a decision. There is a moment of crisis, but you can't predict the future. In other words, once you are received into the Orthodox Church and you start living your Orthodox life, you're going to find that a lot of the temptations that you had, you're going to keep on having. You're going to find that people that you knew before you became Orthodox are still going to know you as the same old person, right? And they're going to try and sort of pull you back into who you used to be. So it has to be said that you will also have to make a decision after you are baptized and chrismated to stick with the Orthodox faith. And this is sort of transitioning into the discoveries section of this video. But the first thing that I discovered after becoming Orthodox is that once you become Orthodox, that's when the fight starts to actually live your Orthodox faith. It doesn't start before you become Orthodox. That's when, right, you're in love, you're discovering this great thing, and you're all in for it, and it's great. The fight starts whenever you've gone to Divine Liturgy for the 100th time or 200th time, and you're thinking, well, I can kind of take a miss on 201, right? It's something that you can't foresee. You can't choose for yourself beforehand. And that moment of decision is going to come. I don't know when it's going to come, and it may come several times. There may be temptations that you fight that come back, and you're going to have to decide, am I going to stick with this, even though it's hard, and continue to be Orthodox? But that decision still has to be made. So I think a lot of converts get the idea that, oh, those cradles, they have to make their decision later after they become Orthodox, or they haven't yet, or, well, once you convert, you haven't come to that crisis yet, right? You're going to have to decide to stick with it as well. Another aspect of this, you can't transfer your conversion to somebody else or to your kids. Over the last few years, I've kind of been diving into statistics on children of converts. So, right, your children come with you into the Orthodox faith oftentimes, especially, the younger children. And you are thinking, okay, well, now I'm going to raise these kids to be Orthodox, or they've received all their sacraments. I've sure done my job. You can't transfer your decision to be Orthodox to them. They, like you, are going to have to decide to make it their own. Even if your children are technically converts, or perhaps your wife, if she decided after you, even if they are technically converts, they're going to have to make a decision on their own after they convert, just like you will. It'll be a different kind of decision. It may be a different kind of crisis, but the fact is that you can't do it for them. And I think that's incredibly important to realize, because I think it causes a lot of frustration for converts. Just be prepared. They're going to have to make it their own. Even if you decide that all your children are going to become Orthodox with you, don't think that you've won the war, right? And also, right, they're not necessarily going to respond positively to your conversion. That's just things that I've seen. So take it or leave it as far as advice goes. As far as other discoveries, there's a lot of scrupulosity out there on the topic of how you become Orthodox. And the scrupulosity comes from certain priests, certain jurisdictions being really strict on how converts are supposed to be received, whether their original baptisms are considered valid, although we really don't, are blessed, with grace, however you want to put it. There's a lot of sort of hand-wringing over this. What I will tell you is that, generally speaking, I haven't seen it matter for anyone except certain Orthodox monasteries. And once you're Orthodox, you're Orthodox. However, your church, your bishop, your jurisdiction chooses to receive you, you're in. Don't get scrupulous about this. Don't get worried about it. You're not going to be kept out of heaven on a technicality. Okay? To quote Boyan from Bible Illustrated. Second, I see a lot of animosity in the Orthodox world between cradle Orthodox and convert Orthodox. And this comes about because oftentimes people who were raised Orthodox, especially within, within one's nationality or ethnic group, oftentimes seem more relaxed about things like fasting or church rules, or even sometimes morality. And sometimes it seems like more of an identity to them than, a religion, something that you're trying to follow. But I think that this animosity is very misplaced. I think, first of all, it has to be acknowledged that out of cradle Orthodox are coming most priests in the world, right? I don't know that you could say that about America, but it's certainly true, internationally. A lot of our saints were cradle Orthodox. A lot of monks, cradle Orthodox. It's not the case that you can sort of set cradles versus converts, in terms of saying one is better than the other. The fact is, everybody has to make a decision to follow Christ and to follow the teachings of his church. And whether that comes earlier or later, and in fact, it almost always comes later for everybody, we're all just sinners trying to live our lives as God wants us to live them. So I think this animosity is incredibly misplaced, and it also will blind you if you have this animosity. If you are a convert and you're looking down on cradles, it will blind you to the spiritual gifts and to the treasures of native orthodoxy that are to be found. It will limit your vision, because most of the world, or most of the Orthodox world, consists of cradle Orthodox. So just keep that in mind. I think the animosity is completely misplaced. If you're not setting that aside when you become Orthodox, if that's not something that you renounce and hate, then you have maybe missed the boat a little bit. That's not spiritual direction. Talk to your priest about it if you're experiencing that. But anyway, that's my opinion and my experience with the situation. Another thing that I've discovered, whenever you become Orthodox later in life, I think it's important to see the Orthodox Church in a greater light than just your local Orthodox parish, especially if your local Orthodox parish is a very convert-friendly or convert-heavy parish. You have to keep in mind that what you're experiencing is a whole lot of people who have a sort of DIY orthodoxy. And I think it's really important in that situation to go and search out the broader tradition and a broader perspective on what orthodoxy is. It can't be put into a few words. So if anyone is telling you this is how orthodoxy is, this is what it is, it's a mystery, partially because it's so wide and diverse. It's something that is, it's the body of Christ. So of course it's a mystery. And accordingly, it has to be experienced in its fullness. So I would say go travel to an Orthodox country and go to church there. Go visit shrines of saints. Go to ethnic Orthodox parishes and worship with them for a Sunday. And don't be judgy, right? Go experience the breadth and the depth of Orthodoxy, because it is so beautiful and so rich. And at the same time, it will serve as a constant corrector to you whenever you say, I have the Orthodox answer. Unfortunately, there's way too many people on the internet who think that, and they've only ever gone to a convert heavy parish. They haven't experienced the wider world of Orthodoxy, and so they think that Orthodoxy can just become a slogan or an ideology. It can't, right? Get out, experience the full, wide Orthodox Church. If you can't tell from how I'm speaking about that, I'm really passionate about that topic. And it's one thing that I tell every person who is learning about Orthodoxy: get out, learn more about the church. Get out, meet more Orthodox people on every part of the Orthodox spectrum. Okay, lastly, discoveries. I do find that a lot of converts kind of treat converting to Orthodoxy like they were joining some secret society. And, when they're inquirers, they're like, oh, I'm an inquirer, like they were a first-degree Mason. Or I just got received in the catechumen and I'm attending classes, like they were joining a fraternity, or like they were rushing, right? It's not, right? You're trying to attain union with Christ here. And so it's not about the ritual or the journey. I know, for some reason, religious education directors, particularly in the Catholic world, love to say, here's the journey that you're going to be on. No, it's not about the journey. It's about conversion. It's about repentance. It's about coming closer to God. And, I think fundamentally the antidote to that, right, is taking a large dose of humility and really honing into what your priest is saying, really, learning about things by observing, and, like I said, getting out there, getting a bigger perspective on things. It's not a secret society, right? It is a society, but it's not a secret society. It's a faith. It's a person, Jesus Christ. Okay. Last little bit, as I said, I'll kind of talk about what the differences are between Orthodoxy and traditionalist Catholicism on this topic. So first of all, churching, there is churching in traditionalist Catholicism. It's not always observed, but the churching in the traditionalist Catholic communities, if you're following the old Rituale Romanum, then it's more about the blessing for the mother than it is about the child. Because, and here's another, difference. Catholics tend to baptize their children a little bit earlier, actually sometimes a lot a bit earlier than Orthodox. And this stems from the difference between how Catholics and Orthodox look at what is going on in the mystery of baptism. So for Catholics, right, becoming Catholic, while it does have the element of initiation, of enlightenment, of receiving the grace of joining the church and that sort of thing, it also has this function of giving you sanctifying grace, which removes both actual and original sin, right? Original sin is seen as something that has to be pulled out of you. Now, Orthodoxy sees original sin as something, or ancestral sin as it's usually called, as something that affects you. And so it's never entirely sort of pulled out of you. You still suffer from it. There's no sort of wound that can be sutured up. It's something that affects you. It's who you are in Orthodoxy. I won't say it. You still have a good nature that God has deemed good, but nonetheless, in Orthodoxy, the idea is that you're always going to be affected by ancestral sin. It's just that the mysteries are going to help you overcome that. In Catholicism, it's pulling something out. It's forgiving you of original sin, and has this function of forgiveness and justification, sanctification, sanctifying grace, etc. And because of that, it's seen as very important for a child's salvation, particularly in traditionalist Catholicism. The belief in limbo is still very, very common. That is the idea that an unbaptized child, including a fetus, right, will be put into a part of hell where there is no supernatural suffering because there was no actual sin, but there won't be any supernatural vision or beatific vision. And so there's this desire to give them the sanctifying grace that if they were to die immediately after that baptism, they'd go to heaven and they would have, immediate grace and the beatific vision of God. So there's this anxiety about getting baptized that leads to Catholics baptizing their children a lot earlier than Orthodox, whereas Orthodox see it just as a development, right? Something that's going to help you through your life, generally speaking. Also, of course, one of the big differences, chrismation. Chrismation roughly corresponds to the Catholic sacrament of confirmation. Most would say that they're the same thing, just in different forms and with different names. That may be true, but chrismation in the Orthodox faith and in the Eastern churches in general is administered with baptism for infants, whereas in traditionalist Catholic churches, it comes later. Now, how much later? Well, this is a big difference between traditionalists and Novus Ordo Catholics. Novus Ordo Catholics tend to put it off later and later. So they'll receive confirmation like 16, sometimes even 18. And it has this connotation of making a decision to be a part of the church, although sometimes it looks a whole lot more like a 10th grade religion project than actually being a sacrament. But anyway, I digress. Traditionalist Catholics tend to do it a little bit younger and still have a very sacramental understanding of what's being received. And some traditionalist Catholics even advocate it being younger still, administered prior to First Holy Communion. But the general pattern is that people that are baptized as infants will receive Holy Communion when they're like 5 or 6, sometimes 7, and then they'll receive confirmation later on in life. So that's a difference. I say that's the general pattern. There are some dioceses and some traditional Catholics that really advocate returning to baptism, then confirmation a little bit later, and then First Holy Communion, or doing First Holy Communion and confirmation at the same time. Obviously, that's closer to the earlier church's understanding of confirmation, so applaud them there, but, it is something that's a little bit different. And a lot of times, traditionalist Catholics basically have to follow the policies of their diocese, so even if they want to confirm children like at 11 or 12, they're prohibited from doing so by the bishop. Oh, that's one other difference. Confirmation, for those that are already Catholic by baptism, confirmation is properly administered only by the bishop or someone appointed by the bishop. For those who convert, it's by special delegation administered by the priest who administers baptism. So that's a little bit different, because in the Orthodox Church, it's generally always the priest that baptizes who administers chrismation. So it's whoever administers baptism administers chrismation and gives First Holy Communion. If you convert later on in life to traditionalist Catholicism, first of all, it's usually a more informal process. So it involves taking instruction one-on-one with a priest, then making one's first confession with a conditional absolution, because you may or may not be baptized. Then baptism, which will be either conditional or absolute, depending on whether or not you were baptized earlier. Confirmation, and then First Holy Communion. And usually all of that is in the context of a private ceremony rather than, say, at the Easter Vigil, like in the Novus Ordo. I say usually, not always. Some parishes have kind of adopted the new model of doing it all at the Easter Vigil on Holy Saturday night. So that is how conversion, or becoming traditionalist Catholic generally, happens, and how it's different from Orthodoxy. So with that, I will say Kalispera. Thank you all for watching. Our next video is going to cover the topic of feast days in the Orthodox Church and how those are similar or different from traditionalist Catholic feast days, and how Orthodox traditionally observe those feast days in different traditions. So I look forward to sharing that with all of you. So again, Kalispera.